They are back in black for a part of it, so let's have a look. It's not an entirely paintless car, but there are bits, Mike, which are paintless, not least the side pods. Where else? And how much weight do you think you've actually saved?
I think that's a really difficult number to give. In fact, I'd have to ask the people that paint the car to know. I mean, the cars probably have about 2 to 3 kilos of paint normally, something of that order. So if we saved a kilo, we'd be doing really well.
Okay, all right. I mean, just to put that into context, we've gone out into the Bahrain night and got ourselves a 4-litre tub of paint, and this is actually that's properly heavy stuff. I couldn't do more than 10 reps on that, and if you're in any doubt as to how much paint weighs yourself, go to your garden centre or your DIY shop, get yourself 3 kilo, you say, tub of paint, and you can proper feel that is a weight. So really, I mean, I can understand why you've taken it off or chosen not to use it. I know you say it's 1 kilo, but you don't need to have it, so why have it at all? Does it serve an aero purpose, having a gloss finish on it?
There is a trade. I mean, on certain bits, things like the wings, you want the right finish, but most of the bodywork, it's not too sensitive to the surface finish.
Okay, all right. See, I've worked up a sweat doing my reps on the with the paint. All right, so that explains that one. There's not a thing about a boundary layer of that can build up that can
on
cause
the key
the drag.
surfaces where you've got the big suction peaks, the lower sides of the wings, the underside of the leading edge of the floor, those areas you have to be reasonably careful. And I think you'll have seen on pictures of cars interesting finishes on rear wings, for instance, to deal with wet weather conditions. But generally speaking, over the areas of the car that don't have big suction peaks, it's relatively insensitive.
Okay, all right. So that's the car in itself. There you go, nice fancy picture of it. Is the team back? Are Mercedes back with this car? We know the car's in black, but is the team back in business?
I think, I mean, you look at where we were beginning of last year and the problems we had. Obviously put a huge amount of effort trying to understand that during last year. Done a lot of work over the winter to try and fix those issues. Depends what you mean by back. I mean, I think we...
In competition?
Well, in competition, then hopefully we're back. Yeah. But I think we have to be humble. We have to remember we've got good competitors. And if we've made a step forward, got closer to the front, then we're back in it. And if we can develop over the course of the season, then hopefully we can fight for the championship.
Okay, that's good. Good to hear for Mercedes fans out there. Bit of a higher nose on the front wing. Why's that?
I think when you get into bits like that, you're well into the details of the aerodynamics, and it tends to be more of a case of, what we find in CFD, what we find in the wind tunnel, rather than there's a key philosophy behind that.
Okay. You stayed with a pushrod front suspension.
Yep.
That's just the concept from last year. Any reason? Does it make much a difference?
So the pushrod as a concept stayed the same. We've moved the track rod down. So it was at the top wishbone, it's now moved down to the bottom. Most of it's just about trying to balance the aerodynamic gains with the compliance of the suspension and getting the kinematics and geometry that you want.
Okay. Is there anything in terms of using that suspension and around the front that is significantly different from last year? We know that you've paid a lot of attention to the rear suspension, giving yourselves much more leeway, what's the word?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest,
scope to actually change stuff.
I think when you take last year's car, we sat down and we said, well, what did we get wrong? What are the bits that we needed to move forward? And we've focus on all of those areas. I think with the front suspension is obviously it's got to hold the wheels on first of all. That's generally helpful, but then the secondary use is really aerodynamic, and it's generally about controlling where the front wing weight goes and how that affects the rest of the car behind. The rear suspension has to be developed in conjunction with the floor. So again, you want good controls of the wheels, and you want the wheels to do the right things under load, but aerodynamically you're also trying to influence the flow around the diffuser.
Okay, on the front wing, Ferrari have copied your front wing slot gap separators of last year. They're not actually on this shot, but they would have been around here. These are standard slot gap separators, but you in Austin came up with a very nice idea with secondary purpose was aerodynamic. They're on the Ferrari. Have the rules changed?
Yes, so within the rules there was a concept of primary purpose, and last year we put those on arguing that the primary purpose was to hold the flap in the right place. and obviously there are a number of complaints about that. I think the FIA's view is, while they could agree the aerodynamics were secondary, I think they decided that they were a step too far for them and wanted them removed. This year the rules are different. There's now 2 planes 10 mil apart, and as long as you're within those 2 planes, then you can pretty much fill what you want to fill. So what Ferrari have done is within the rules for this year. As it happens, they weren't for us worth a huge amount. They're an interesting shape, and we definitely stirred the hornet's nest a little bit with them last year. But they're not game changers.
Might they reappear on your front wing?
Oh, wait and see.
I will wait and see. What about everything else? I mean, you've still done the same thing around here with the side impact structures, bigger mirrors for this year.
Was that regulation?
Yeah, by regulation. Was that a packaging issue? Was that an issue you had to overcome for an aero blockage?
No, I mean I think the mirrors are bigger and they cause more loss downstream. And as for the sort of the winglet geometry we've got there. We looked around all the other bodywork types we could have done, and in the end decided that sticking with where we were was the best solution for us.
Okay. I love the little downwards guiding turning vane in there.
Was there last year as well.
I'm sure there was, but you can see the little whiskers on top of there.
Yeah.
What's the purpose? What are these?
Well, these are all details, and again, generally the aim of a Formula One car is to you're trying to control the wake of the front tyres, trying to manage that wake and put it in the right place. And within sort of the regulations that came last year, that's far more challenging. One of the ideas to try and improve overtaking was to stop us managing the wake of the front tyres in detail, meaning that when you got behind another car, that sort of wake management didn't just disappear. And so again, these are all sort of little details that help. We don't get back to the sort of control we had a couple of years ago, but they all help.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because there was the front wing end plate cut out, which you can see quite nicely on here, which I thought was subject to a regulation change, that they wanted it to be solid, but not. This was something you pioneered last year, and it's still on your car, albeit slightly differently.
So, yes, so there was a regulation change aimed at closing that down, but we found a loophole in that that allowed us to run the version we've got. It's not the same as last year, but it's
it's got a little wing flap, a little flap there. Nice.
I won't explain how we do that, but
well done. I like it. And this front tyre temperature monitor seems to change slightly.
Yeah.
There it's on the end of the upper end of the end plate, and then on a previous photo I've got back here, it sticks up slightly. So what's going on there? No, it's always there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't think that would change very much.
No? Okay, good. My mistake, it's always there. All right, let's move to a really interesting part of the car. A lot of people are talking about this, and that's the cockpit itself. It seems to be that you've moved the cockpit forwards. Is that for...
Not from last year, we haven't.
Not from last year?
No, same as last year.
All right.
So we were quite forward last year.
Okay, and then a lot of people are looking at the integration of the halo into the bit around the driver's head, and where we go with these cooling tunnels. You can clearly see on this photo going to the back. Talk us through all of that.
Yeah, I mean the aerodynamics.
Here we go, really stick out.
Call them the gullies.
The gullies.
And that's just about managing losses. So again, the cockpit area is obviously quite open, and the losses from there ordinarily would sort of travel down the car and potentially influence the rear wing. So that sort of design is about managing those losses. And I think when you look at a lot of the cars, we're maybe at the more extreme end, but there's a lot of cars feature that sort of gully feature.
But these gullies are quite high up. That doesn't give you a centre of gravity loss?
No, that bodywork's pretty light.
Okay.
If you sort of look at, if we're filling that volume with something underneath, then it'd be heavy, but that bodywork's pretty light.
So that's not a cooling channel. There's not air coming out of a radiator somewhere through those gullies, the sort of round, the sausage-shaped bit, and then out the back, because that's where it looks to lead.
So that's exactly what happens, but it's just a big opening inside the bodywork. So the normal volume you'd have that comes out of the back of the car is still there. It's just we've channeled those areas to higher up on the car.
Okay.
But in terms of weight, it doesn't really make very much difference, or certainly in CFG it doesn't make very much difference.
Yeah, you see there. And then the integration to the halo is also quite interesting, because you've actually taken it all in there, and the halo used to kind of come down and have a mounting point, but you've put it all up.
Yeah.
And why is that?
Well, again, the same thing. It's just, I mean, the halo itself is the same by regulation, so it's just how we've we've managed the bodywork around that to control the losses.
Okay, all right, let's talk about the middle of the car and the side pods. Still staying with the slim side pods. By the way, you haven't got the little secondary side pod which leads to a duct on the outside into their gully like the Ferrari. You've seen that? It's nothing.
I've seen that.
It's nothing. Is it anything groundbreaking?
Obviously, that's their car and not ours, but my guess is they're just managing the losses off the chassis side and putting them somewhere safe. So, you know, as we were talking about the bodywork here in the gullies and saying how we're managing that, I think on the Ferrari, they take the losses off the side of the chassis to save them going around the bodywork and port them up into the same region and control it in the same way.
Okay, so on the side pods, you've said many times that it's not the side pod concept that was the issue with your car last year, but there's also this thought that there's rumours about a plan B for the car. Just tell us the truth on all of this. What's this talk about a plan B, and if the car gets a big upgrade package, which we would expect it to have, will it look significantly different in this area?
So there is a bodywork coming that will look different. It won't look like somebody else's. It'll look like an evolution of ours.
Okay. All right. So
that's on its way.
You can put that to bed. That you're not going to. You haven't found something like a different concept like Red Bull Run or something like that, and you're not going to go to that halfway through the season?
No, not well, it's not in our current plans.
Okay, well that's good, because it would have to be in your current plans. That's good that you're actually setting the record straight on that one, because it had been a rumour around the place. What about the entrance, the throat, as they say, to the floor and the Venturis? You managed to get a bit more sort of air into that critical area?
Well, I think when you look at these cars, nearly all the performance is from the floor. And it's all about managing the flow that goes in there, how it washes out the side and how it goes through the diffuser behind, and then also, obviously, particularly with these ground effect cars, managing their interaction with the ground. So there's a huge amount of detail changes under the floor, including that leading edge.
Okay, and just finally talking about the floor itself, obviously the bouncing, the porpoising was an issue. The floor has been raised 15 mil. Has that largely, as well as the work that you've done, cured your issues from last year?
I think obviously we were at the worst end of the extreme of the bouncing. We put a lot of effort into trying to understand that in the aerodynamics world. Did quite a lot of testing at the end of last year to make sure that our metrics were working properly, and we've used those over the winter in developing the car. And so far, you know, touch wood, we've not seen a huge amount of bouncing, and that's where we hope to be.
And finally, what about the car in a straight line, Mike? On the speed traps on the GPS, the car's appeared in the sort of lower half of everybody on the straight line. Is that an engine thing, or are you running a bit too much drag still?
Oh, we're probably not running the wing we'll run when we come racing.
Okay. All right. So it's not a drag issue. You've managed to shed a load of the drag from last year.
I mean, I think we've developed the car's efficiency quite a lot over the winter. But where we choose to run the race will be about how we think is the best way to run the race. Obviously, here testing, it's about just trying to understand, and so we've not done any work sort of moving up and down in downforce level. We've just sort of kept it constant, tried to get all the data we can from the car, understand as much as we can about the car and what issues we might face, and just build from there.
And finally, with the kilo loss, or a couple of kilos lost from the paint and everything else, the car is now underweight, on the weight limit, underweight?
We'll be operating the car on the weight limit because we can't do anything other than that, and we should have a little bit to play with. A
little bit of ballast in there as well. Brilliant. Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much, Mike, for talking us through the thought processes and the progress that you've made with W14. Eventually seems to be the word of the day at Mercedes. George Russell used it twice.